Welcome back to Wickerson Studios. I'm going to continue along with taking a look at making a few videos, 3 videos a week. First one I've already made dealing with learning Rhino with Grasshopper, and I've started that, and you can take a look at that. It's up here on Patreon, it's on YouTube. But now we're going to go on to learning Grasshopper with Grasshopper plugins because that's so essential. And for people that don't know what I'm talking about, you definitely want to go in and open up a Rhino window. And the easiest way to start putting plugins in, and the one I want to introduce right here, is Bifocals, which is a really cool tool because when you input it, you can grab something like a sphere and you'll see that you can leave it as icon under display, but it'll put a little name above it. And you're not stuck going in here grabbing without the bifocal, this node, making a group, and then typing in the group, sphere. And that takes a little bit of time. That basically does the same thing without the bifocal node, but it's nice to have that plugin. So as we have plugins coming in, learning Grasshopper from plugins, I'm going to show you how to put them in here. So that's the one I want up and running. And how do I get that to pop in up here? Well, there's many, many ways. You can custom and make your own user objects. You want to go into File, you want to go into Preferences, and hang on a second. You want to go to File, you want to go down to Special Folders and Components. Now, if you've made user objects like me, you're going to have a ton of user objects that you grab off of different things, which I find very handy and useful. But most people will just go in and have to go into special folders and tuck things into the component folder, which will show you everything that I have in as plugins. The fastest way to do it is actually go down into Rhino and type in Package Manager, but now you're dependent on whether or not somebody actually brought it through Yak or through the Package Manager here appropriately. And I worked on one with Daniel Kristev, and he did a wonderful job to bring the Dominion in here. So if you type in something like the Dominion, there it is. It'll show up here, and then you can download it. Please download it and install it. It's only had 262 downloads, but it was something I computationally worked on with Daniel Kristev, and he brought it here. What you can see is if you type in something like bifocals, you're not going to get anything. And it's just going to default out when you hit enter. So if I go back in the package manager and I scroll down through here looking for bifocals, I'm not finding it. So that leaves me, outside of that, you can just click something and then you can do the install on it, which is pretty easy, and then you get it plugged in. What you definitely want to do is make sure that bifocals is in one of these special libraries. So what I'm going to recommend you do is go down to special folders, component folder, and recognize you have to tuck it in here. This is where it has to be tucked in, right here. And you can follow this path from C to users, whatever I do to bring it to what I want to do. So let's just keep that one open because that's where I want to drop it into. So that's it. And the place to find things is over here on Food for Rhino. So type in Food for Rhino, go to that page, and then try and find out what you're looking for. So you could tuck in the Dominion, and this is the other way to do it. The Dominion, I think there's a couple of names, and there you go. You get the one that Daniel Kristev's put together, and put together well. Search, blah, blah, blah. And there it is. It's right there, and you can go in and you can download it. I got 1 vote. All right. So that one's moving a little slow. But let's go back in, and let's take a look for one for bifocals. And as long as you have an account, Bifocals, I need to spell it right. You can go into this one, give it a second to load up, blah, 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 and there it is, and you can click on it. It'll tell you everything that they wanted to tell you about it, and you should be able to log in through your email, hit download, and you will have it. Now, it will go to your downloads, but then you're faced in going back here to your libraries, and you will have to, I got a couple open here, but let's just use this one. This is where I actually want to put it. Bifocals should be in here somewhere. Where are you? I might have put it in another location either way. Let's just assume we're looking at Firefly. But then I usually hit Command N, get open another screen, go to my downloads, and that's where I would have brought something in, and then I can pull that and slide it right in here and just physically push things around like a physical person. When you do have things in here, you have to be careful with this. So I've got CPython, GHCPython, I've got a couple of ones here. Anything you open or anything you're trying to get access to, so here's Cocoon as I open it up. There's the files, the GH files that I need running. I go on every single one, right click, and go to Properties and ensure that it says Unblocked, or I go to Advanced and hit Unblock. But there is no blocked one here, so I must have already opened it. Let's try this one. Properties, Advanced, that's the same. Let me try and find one that's maybe still locked up. We'll go to Taco. There's Taco. Properties, no, Advanced, it's fine too. In most cases, these do kind of unblock themselves. Let's try the CPython Properties. Advanced, still that one's fine. And why don't I try Firefly Core? I don't remember ever doing that one. Nope, there is no unblocking that I have to do. Any link library, you can also try and get in here and hit unblock. But it looks like it's running. If that's working, then you want to come back out, leave this behind, and you want to close Grasshopper and Rhino. So you got to close right out, you got to close Rhino, then you got to open Rhino back up, and then you got to type in Grasshopper. And as it loads, you'll see that if I do that, if I close Grasshopper, if I close Rhino, well, I'm not going to bother because it just takes too much time. Let's just Grasshopper, you type in, you'd see it load. It might take a few minutes for all your plugins. You can see I have a ton of stuff in my Grasshopper. So I not only have all of this, I've got Dragonfly. This is your vanilla. It basically comes standard, params, math sets, vectors, curves, surfaces, mesh, intersections, transformations, and display. And that is all going to change with Grasshopper 2.0. One thing I've noticed is the intersections wasn't there last time I checked. But Dragonfly is cool. Got Firefly I like. HB Energy, I'm not sure why I put it in here. Weaverbird, I love to download. We'll be doing that one pretty fast. I got all the scripts and nodes from Argo Jewelry, which I'm very happy to have. FlexHopper, I was always impressed with the physics engines. Kuka Robotics, Lunchbox to use log, paneling tools, and then blah, 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 blah. And a lot of these I've actually gone nuts in making user objects and not even naming them, so I could learn C#, I could learn Python, I could learn from other white papers. I've done a ton of work like that to try and wrap my head around scripting and coding prior to going anywhere close to. There's Lunchbox, which makes me think this is Ladybug. Yeah, that's it. And Ladybug works more if you're interested with analysis and everything. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff in here. Some plugins are very small, some are very tiny. What do I have here? C algorithms. Those are like more complex C algorithms that I got from Parametric Camp. And Taco ABB is in here. And I've even got V-Ray in here. So some of these things I forget about. I very rarely take them out. Sometimes they're stuck in another folder, and I just have to figure out where they are. But we're not going to go too hard into those. What I do want to say is when you reload up and you've got Bifocals downloaded, you'll be able to grab that node and pull it in and be able to do some magic stuff with it. So what could we do to start with Bifocals? That's how to go in. Let's start at the absolute basics of what's happening here. And I'm going to jump in and make... we're going to basically learn Grasshopper. People have asked from the basics, and we're going to do it learning Grasshopper from plugins. And our first plugin is going to be Bifocals. It doesn't have a name on it. It's just called Exceptions, Bifocals Active, and there it is. It should show up in your utilities because that's how they developed it in the Params tab. So what would I do now when I start an exercise? Well, I usually took my Bifocals up here. I think that this is the canvas, this section. And we'll see what we end up building and if there's anything interesting in here. First thing I want to do is I want to grab my scribble tool like I did earlier today. And I'm going to put on my cap locks, and I'm going to call this exercises params. And we're just going to work through every single thing that I have, vanilla or whatnot, and get it up and running by plugins and only introduce plugins when we have to. So there you go, exercise params. Let's pop it in there. Let's actually make that huge because why not have a nice big area to play with. It's maybe a little too big, but exercises params, and we want to call that, we'll take another scribble tool, we'll downsize that to 50. Always good to script your visual node scripting as best you can and go into full detail and grouping and analysis because it's not as easy to read. Well, it's clear and organized and straight down, easy to read as Visual Studio Code scripts or in different coding languages, but it certainly can get lost in the wires. So let's go into here and let's call this one 001, and we'll do this as params geometry. And we're going to do these ones for the second section of the Patreon and I'm going to red tag this as a group so I know it's very important. And you got to realize there's exercises you have to do, and I'll show a few techniques of how I do this. Yeah, I'll leave it red. That's fine. Now, what do we want to do? We want to get in here, and actually I think I'll grab my AB and go even smaller. And now let's say exactly what we want to do. And I want to, I think I'll actually cut and paste to save time, but you can do this on your own. I'm going to copy, and I'm just going to paste it in here. Basically, what I want to do is generate objects in the Rhino environment, set single and multiple objects into Grasshopper containers, activate the geometry pipeline, which is an interesting node and should be in here, preview, enable, set geometries and objects, internalize, and extract. Now, how do you do things like that? Well, what I do is I say, let's take a look at these first params and all of these hexagon-shaped containers. They are not really components. They are, but they're very minimal components, literally containers. What are some of the things I'd like to use in here? Well, I could use a point, and because Bifocals is there, I can see that that's a point. The next one that I possibly would use, but you cannot visualize it, is a vector. And this is where in Grasshopper 2.0, they've actually made it so you can see those vectors, but there is this little tool called display over here that you go and you take it. This point needs to be a point container to grab something, so you can either right-click on it, set one point, and put your point where you want. That can be the anchor to a vector that needs to be created. So I'm going to set one vector, and I'm going to hold it ortho and probably go to front and lift it up to this point, and I have a vector that will go to here. Now, I can't see that vector until I use the vector visualization tool, and there it is. And I'm dropping things into these containers, and they can be extracted out and used later, but I'm using what containers are good for. The next thing that I like to use in the Params tab, going in here, because I'm just thinking back here, what would I be making here? Well, I'd be making points, and I'd be making lines, and in times I'd end up making vectors from those things as well, magnitudes with direction. So let's go back into here and see, and you can get it accustomed to knowing what they look like, but I would suggest either, if you can't find the curve what you want, double click and type what you want. And I'm looking for a curve, anything with curves. And look for that hexagon shape. There's your curve container. It's right there. And once again, I want to put in a curve. So unlike here, it's not working parametrically, but I'm now going to draw out a curve. And that curve I'm going to select, I'm going to right click, and I hit set one curve, and there we go. All of these things that are being dropped in here, they can technically, if I internalize them, that one's actually been created from it, so I don't have to. That one's been chosen from it, so I don't have to internalize it. This one had to be internalized, and once it is, I can take those and I can get rid of them, and I still have these ghosted forms that are actually in here, which is really nice. So there's the point, there's the vector, and there's the curve. The next thing I'll want to do, and this one works a little differently, and it's a little frustrating for some people that are new, a line. I cannot create a line. It's just the way the interface works out. So if I made a line, single line from 2 points, I can't then go here and say set one line and select that. I actually have to go to that line and copy the points on it. So now I technically have 2 lines here, but I'm going to internalize the value. Don't have to because it created it from it, but I can certainly get rid of that line that I made initially so I could follow the points. So now we have the point, the vector, the curve, and the line. Nice things to think about. The next thing you probably will want to make is something, and I'm pretty sure it can be visualized. Over here, I'm going to take a look, and it's this one, plane. I might want to make a plane, but I think the same thing goes. I'm going to create one of the planes. I'm going to start it in the center point. I'm going to move it in this direction, and I'm going to rotate it up like this in that direction. Now that plane is there. You can see it. But the thing is, Grasshopper doesn't know how big you want to make it until you go up to this part of display and set pane size. So I've got it set it to 12. I'm just going to hit 8 and enter. And now I'm going to downsize that plane size to 8. Another thing you might want to bring in. The other tool that you might want to bring in over on this section, more advanced, is a boundary representation. What will be a boundary representation? I guess it could be anything I wanted to make, but I'm going to grab a simple cube, put it in here, stretch it up, take my boundary representation, and set one object to it. And then, through internalizing the data, I can get rid of the dependency on that shape. And I'm showing all the breakdown of these if you want to know your types, but I'm also going to show you the master type that would actually work with it. The other thing to do is to go in here and possibly grab a mesh, and the mesh could be the same. Meshes can be made by clusters of points in so many ways. I'm just going to set a mesh to reference. I don't actually have one in here, so I can't go grab it, and I can't generate it from this one. So I'm just going to leave that for a second, and I might just grab point. I'm actually going to right-click so I can set multiple points, point. I'm going to select these two, and I'm going to lift them up. I'm going to select this one. I'm going to move that one up a little bit. I'm going to select all these points, and I'm actually going to create a more complex thing. Go in and create a mesh, which would be primitive construct mesh from those vertices. I could set those points as all of those vertices, and I end up, it actually is trying to make a planar mesh. Probably not something I want. I'm going to do something a little bit more more complex. What could I get? Let's just type mesh, see what we get. I could do cocoon. I could do it construct mesh. Deconstruct faces, face normal. So don't usually work in meshes too often. So I'm not too, primitive shape, construct mesh. Well, that's what I just did. The vertices. What does this one want? I'm just curious. Faces, optional color. I think we could probably go into triangulation, and I think you have it on here. Let's just grab a delineate mesh, which is kind of nice. And then from those points that would normally have been a point container here, I could set multiple points, grab, and now it wants me to, now it wants me to take those points, and I'm just going to set them in, set multiple points in there, and draw that out, and then I have this mesh that's created here, and that mesh can be put into this mesh, and now I have the mesh that's referenced. These you'll get in the habit of previewing off, because I actually only want to see this one. So I'm just building some clumsy geometry and showing how to use containers, and then also update as I move these. Obviously the mesh has to update, which is called recorded history, what you would normally use Grasshopper for. So let's just get through this pretty fast. Let's grab a surface that might be nice and quick to use. I'm going to grab a quad sphere, which I love so much. Quad spheres can be put on board, and the quad sphere itself, I'm just going to upsize its radius to 12, and I have a pretty big radius of the quad sphere. What I like about it is it's actually can be deconstructed. We're getting ahead of ourselves, that I can grab one of the faces, and I'm going to use a little bit of a tool within sets, which is a list. Let's grab the face sets, and I just want to grab the top one, indices, and I can grab that as the surface, and there you go. I can take all these ones off, which are not important anymore, and you see that I have that nice little surface from that quad sphere that's actually controllable. And once again, these points I'm going to internalize so I can get rid of these points. And now we're still making all these ghosted, wonderful container forms. The last thing I want to show is what I consider one of the most important going into params is bypass all that other stuff. If it fits nicely into a geometry, just use the geometry node. So take that node, copy it again. You could take every single one of these items and treat it like a geometry, even though the vector tab, you have to hold down shift to get the next one in, shift to get the next one in. This is one technique to do this. The other thing you can do is go into sets and trees and merge. And I like this tool because you can just sit here and grab everything you want, and another space becomes available. And the other tool to consider doing this with is Entwine, which maintains the data structure, which we'll talk about for more advanced, but you could pull it into those as well. I'm just going to take this and shift this one in, and there we go. We've got a whole bunch of wonderful things in here that if I grafted them, they're all on their own item, and I could very quickly go back and have them all tucked into there and use an explode tree, blah, blah, blah. There it is. And I could open these all up, and it's going to say, well, how many items do you have? And it doesn't automatically do this, but once I get to the amount of items that are actually there and the paths that are actually driving them, you can see that it kind of has a different pile path because of the way I entered those items. But there's all the items that I could pull out individually, and I could package them right back into what they were if I knew this one was a point, The next one was a vector. I could pack them all back into those forms as well, the same points I used here. So that's just a nice beginning. It's using the plugin for, actually what I think I'll do is I'll grab this as the geometry group, and we'll take these as kind of algorithms, because that's the way I kind of think about it. We'll take these as a group of algorithms, and we'll take this as a group of parameters. So I'm just going to group that one, and I'm actually going to go in here and grab a term here and call this algorithm, just to make sure we stay consistent. Oh, sorry, we're going to call that parameters. There we go. And we're going to take that, and we're going to introduce that into here, add to group, and we're going to use color for parameters red, and we're going to make that to blob because I want to play with it. This one will be algorithms. And we can take that and add that to the group. And we can take these ones, and technically they're just the project itself playing around with it. So it's a nice beginning. I'm going to call this one file, save document as, and I'm going to actually call it the Params geometric tutorial, and save it and override what was there, and we're done. And there you go. Pretty nice. Just to start with, to get you thinking about what you're doing, what you're choosing. We could have a list item as we go and grab this, and I'm just going to do something just to show you the power of the geometry. Actually, I think what I wanted was a geometry pipeline to make this exciting. So let's grab the geometry pipeline node, and it's been a while since I worked this one. I'm pretty sure if you hit Control Alt and hover this, you'll see that that's in Params. It's right there in the geometry, down here on the geometry pipeline, and then you can grab whatever you want to filter through to a geometry node to visualize it. So now you can select what you want, whether you want the points, whether you want the curves, whether you want the breps, or whether you want the meshes. And that will funnel everything through as you grab hold of those, which is kind of just a nice little tool for getting in and working. I don't really use it that often, but it's a nice thing to think about containers and how to activate it. And that's not an extra plugin. That comes with the vanilla nodes right here, and you can figure out how and when you want to use that and what you want to grab and send back. But it's dependent on things that actually exist in the Rhino window. So you have to take things off the bake. Anyhow, keep in mind that this item, if I went here and baked it all, I could do it all on one layer, and we got every single thing back in here. At least there's our line. What happened? Let's grab all these geometries and go to bake, and yes, and hit go, and there they are. They're all here for us to play with. Once again, we've generated them. We work parametrically. I still have my ghosted form. I can start taking these apart, and of course I have to explode them because I put them all together. So let me see if I can Control Shift edit and grab like one thing. I'm going to grab that mesh, move that one out here. There we go. And then because these have been selected, I still have to move them around this way. I'm going to take the plane down. I'm just playing around with how I'm moving it. Select edit this piece. Actually, I think I'll select edit the plane, the surface, and we'll pull that one this way. There we go. And I'm just playing around with what I baked. So go back and forth, think of your first scripts to make them parametric, use some algorithms to generate some shapes, think of containers, and possibly after you get them organized, you can then use the geometry pipeline to play around a little bit with them as well. And yeah, nice little simple start to learning Grasshopper with plugins, and starting with one of the most basic plugins available, which allows you to see what's going on with your naming of your nodes. All right. Thanks very much for watching. Michael Wickerson at Wickerson Studios.